I plan to make early game guides on all of the initial classes though, starting from Duelist and working my way down for the first week's release of the game. So if you find yourself struggling, make sure to refer to those when they're out.
And suffer and wait for the full week if you still pick Galactic Knight.
You could not live with your own failure. Where did that bring you? Back to me.
Welcome back to your Galactic Knight Masterclass Guide. I'll be your host JB, and in today's video I'll be trying to explain how to get the most out of this class. This is the finale of my Masterclass series, tailored towards getting new players through the entire main story of Xenoblade X. I will be avoiding talking about endgame builds throughout this video, but with Galactic Knight, it's an inevitability. As always, if you enjoy this content and find it useful, please consider hitting that subscribe button and notification bell, as it's free and helps me out a ton. With all that out of the way, let's get right into the guide. The Galactic Knight class consists of both the Psycho Launchers and Photon Saber weapon types, and is considered the hardest and least accessible class for new players to pick up. This won't be entirely inherent, however, until reaching Chapter 5, as many of you have pointed out that to play this class through the early game, you just need to spam melee arts to get the melee combo bonus, but upon unlocking this button here in the center is where the real challenge begins. In exchange for the class's difficulty, you are rewarded with the highest overall stat line of any of the classes, offering a bonus to your ranged and melee attack stats. But that's just what the game wants you to think. In reality, Galactic Knight increases all of your base stats with potential, both ranged and melee attack, and your maximum HP getting a 20% increase. I'll showcase on screen now the actual bonuses granted for all the other classes also, which the UI for those isn't entirely inaccurate, so I never mentioned or fixed for simplicity's sake. But this does mean that there is a reason to choose one of these specific classes over one another in the endgame, depending on what you are doing for your build. This other super helpful graphic also showcases what the stats of these classes will look like at level 60, the previous level cap, with green highlighting the highest possible stat and orange showing the lowest. And as you can tell, what this means is that after you finish grinding through all of the other classes and have maxed everything out, you could go back to Drifter to make use of the additional skill slot, or stick with Galactic Knight to receive an overall buff to your stat line. Overall, this all comes together and results in Galactic Knight being an interesting and powerful class to play through the game with, as long as you know what you're doing, but will be even better towards the end of the game, where we then focus our specific strong builds. Your primary weapon for this class should always be the Photon Saber, the admittedly super cool lightsaber type weapon which just feels awesome to use and see flash around the screen as you perform your arts. They have 14 different arts, possessing a ton of different auras, a few different buff effects, and many strong damaging melee arts, which increase their power in melee combos. Most detrimentally, however, they lack a purple art outside of Phenomenon, which is blocked via Doug's final affinity mission, meaning that some grinding will be required to obtain it. They also lack the physical attribute, but I wouldn't worry as this is the overall weakest attribute in the game, and can come in any other element depending on your build and party structure. As for their auto attacks, they have a relatively short cooldown, second only to the knife weapon, but have even lower TP generation than them, resulting in a fast weapon type but preventing overall good TP generation, which will become a trend later as we'll see. This leads to an overall flashy weapon, which does have the potential to deal some great damage when it all comes together, but when playing through the game for yourself, you may get overwhelmed by the sheer amount of auras and the lack of combat arts that you unlock, but will end up being an amazing weapon type to use when all is said and done. That brings us onto the Psycho Launcher's weapon, which before DE released was by far the weakest weapon type within the game. However, Monolith seems to have been aware of this and has led to a number of incredibly powerful buffs, which very well may now make them one of the best in a party setting. They possess 11 different arts, 2 of which are new to this game, with a fairly equal share of all art types. They are also the only other weapon in the game, aside from assault rifle, that have both yellow ranged arts and orange melee arts, which in this case isn't a good thing, as it results in this weapon type having no TP arts, which are yellow, and no normal arts, which are orange, meaning that during overdrive, you will need to be aware of all of the color combo effects just to make this weapon work in the first place. This, on top of most arts having a very low hit count, make them very meh at first glance, but do have the potential to come in any attribute. Their auto attack capabilities are also nothing to scoff at, providing a decent cooldown speed, moderate TP generation, and a mediocre magazine capacity, which typically leads to a pretty nice loop of swapping between Photon Saber and Psycho launchers. The final consensus is that this weapon type overall is pretty weak, and will remain that way until optimized by some of its new arts and buffs. When built around, they can certainly be an effective ranged weapon type, but without the optimization, they're just alright at best, with a few good supportive arts and potential to perform some shenanigans, which we'll talk about momentarily. That brings us onto the loadout, and there's going to be a lot to take in here, so be prepared. The absolute art that is a necessity when running Galactic Knight, and should arguably be used with whatever Photon Saber build you run, is Essence Exchange. This art has a very simple effect, in that it swaps both your current HP and TP statistics, which, yes, does mean that you can instantly kill yourself at any point by using it at 0 TP, which is just a general inherent risk of this class. This art also requires you to go out of your way to complete Yelv's first affinity mission, unlocked after completing chapter 5, which I've tried to avoid throughout these masterclass guides, as not all players may want to sink their teeth right now into the side content, but with Galactic Knight, I'm afraid you don't really have a choice. The main reason is that this class has a pitifully low TP generation capabilities, and really struggles in replenishing another 3000 TP to reactivate overdrive without this art. So if you intend to use this crucial core mechanic throughout the game with this class, you need to get this art ASAP. Using Essence Exchange, however, will normally regularly put you at very low HP, which can proc a soul voice, but will typically need a bit more protection if we don't want to instantly fall over, which is where our aura comes in, where the best option hands down is Astral Protection. This aura restores a moderate amount of HP with each art activation, which is crucial for being able to repeatedly use Essence Exchange to regain TP during combat, but also provides great defensive utility by increasing all of our attribute resistances. When talking about defense in Xenoblade X, there are 2 specific things to mention. Firstly is the defense stat of any gear that you equip, which will slightly reduce the damage you take overall, but isn't overly effective. And the second way is via attribute resistances. These are an independent modifier when calculating damage, and can result in massive amounts of DPS being lost or gained. For example, if an enemy had a physical resistance stat of 50, they would take 50% the damage they normally should, and an enemy or ally with 100 of a specific attribute resistance will only ever take 1 damage from that attribute source. This is important because this is how Astral Protection works, raising all of your resistances by 35 points at level 5 and by 50 points if you let your secondary cooldown effect take place, which with the right gear combination can make you very tanky to all sources of damage and keep you alive and going even when you've brought yourself down to low HP with Essence Exchange. The only downside is that you unlock this art pretty late, so before this point, Geolibrium is a decent substitute and at least provides you with a constant supply of health regeneration, or you have the option to simply grind the support missions via the terminal in the barracks to unlock it even faster. As for some of the other auras like Astrolibrium and Novalibrium, they have their niche use cases, but the only other aura that I would even consider long term is Dual Dynamo, which acts as the best offensive aura for this class, assuming you have another way to heal yourself up reliably. In an effort to speed things up slightly, in terms of your offensive arts, what I would recommend is Starfall Rondo, Starfall Blossom, and Galactic Cataclysm. Starfall Rondo, aside from being iconic, is a great single target art, which is both powerful, mowing through enemies in the early game, but also a great way of building the counter during overdrive. Starfall Blossom has less hits, but provides an alternative way of building some TP. Not enough in the grand scheme of things, but still useful to provide yourself with extra security before essence exchanging. That leaves Galactic Cataclysm, which is your best TP art option within this game, having a single hit but doing a ton of damage and getting even stronger when an aura is active. You can also consider replacing this with Sky Sunder, Photon Saber's brand new art, which functions the exact same as before, but has the opportunity to deal even more damage once you've stacked a ton of debuffs on the enemy, making it frankly silly and ridiculous. I would avoid Starlight Duster, however. Despite how appealing it may look, gravity is a great powerful attribute and does rip through most enemies, but our high hit count here actually becomes a bad thing due to how long the art's animation is, locking you into all the sword swings and just wasting a ton of time overall, which may be needed to essence exchange before the timer runs out. The next arts I want to talk about are Lightning Cloak, Phenomenon, Conduction Rise, Heroic Tail, and Astral Purge. Let's begin with Lightning Cloak, a green buff art which seems awfully specific but can have a key use for this build, that being us having access to the green colour combos without being forced to use Essence Exchange. The Electric Res Up buff is also nice for the same reasons I mentioned earlier, and when paired with Astral Protection can make you virtually immune to this damage type depending upon which gear and such you select. Astral Purge is here for the same reason, but offers a different type of utility, instead cleansing a single party member of all their debuff effects, which can be useful in specific situations, but like with the knife, can make your whole overdrive process slower by requiring another button input to select a target. As for our purple arts, Phenomenon is a phenomenal art that deals great damage and inflicts ether resistance down on the enemy, which is crucial, especially when running Core Crusher builds in the endgame. It also has a relatively quick animation and acts as a great source of gaining some TP during overdrive, with the only downside being that you require to get Dog to 3 Hearts of Affinity. A newly added art that is far more accessible is Conduction Rise, unlocked by completing Neonail's first affinity quest when you recruit her in Chapter 5, and applies the brand new Conduction Rise effect. This drastically increases the damage of all damage over time effects on the enemy by what I believe to be a figure close to 3 times the initial damage output. All in all, this art is just great to gain early access to a decent purple art for this class, and when optimized for the end game can be used to perform feats where we can inflict over 1 million damage per tick on our shock and blaze effects. That leaves Heroic Tail, which is Neonail's other affinity mission art, this time unlocked far later after Chapter 11, and is potentially the outright strongest art in this game for multiple reasons. Before that, however, I need to quickly touch on debuffs and explain that there are 2 types within this game, those being normal debuffs and what we refer to as mobility debuffs. Normal debuffs include most of what we've discussed up until this point throughout my videos, including Blackout, Conduction Rise, Fatigue, and Ether Res Down, for example, whereas mobility debuffs include things like Topple, Launch, Control, and Sleep. This is where things get interesting, as Heroic Tail is an effect which encompasses the Control Mobility debuff effect, along with the potential to rank up chests dropped from the enemy, but functions as a normal debuff effect, not a mobility debuff. This is interesting because an art I mentioned previously in the Mastermind video, known as Bahamut Wave, has the ability to both spread and rank up the debuff effects to nearby enemies, but only works on normal debuffs and not mobility ones. I'm not sure whether this is an oversight or not, but this effectively allows you to spread control across every single enemy that you are fighting in battle. And did I mention that it doesn't cost any TP to use this art, unlike the other control inflicting art on Knife being Brainjack? I think you can see what I'm getting at now. The only other purple arts are Jetstream and Taquet Sensier, both of which aren't very good, and I mostly recommend you replace them upon obtaining one of the other purple arts mentioned. Jetstream inflicting stun, which has a very short effect time and having a pretty lengthy animation, which I find gets in the way of things, and Taquet Sensier inflicting virus, which is a super cool debuff effect, which sadly most enemies, not just including tyrants and bosses, are straight up immune to. The final two arts that I want to mention are Stellar Ray and Shooting Star, the latter of which was virtually useless in the original game, but thanks to the sheer power of the Conduction Rise effect now makes it an actual viable option, having one hit and inflicting shock. Stellar Ray, on the other hand, is actually a really good art that I'll be running on today's build, having 5 hits and hitting all enemies surrounding you, dealing bonus damage whilst an aura is active, and inflicting beam resistance down on each hit, which gives it a tendency to rank up to level 4, pairing super nicely with Galactic Cataclysm or Sky Sunder that are locked to the beam attribute, allowing us to inflict a hell of a lot of damage. That was a lot to take in, so now let's try and put all of this together to actually construct a functioning art palette. For the purposes of this guide, I will be using Essence Exchange, Astral Protection, Lightning Cloak, Stellar Ray, Conduction Rise, Phenomenon, Starfall Rondo, and Galactic Cataclysm. Each of these arts are specifically located so that I can scroll from left to right during overdrive to get the most out of this class, but I'll talk on those color combos once we reach the demonstration section of this video. Finally, we can move on to the skills you should equip for this build, and I'm happy to report that Galactic Knight does possess some excellent skills that you absolutely will want to go for. For the purposes of this build, Aura Assault and Inner Search will be absolute musts. Inner Search increasing your potential stat by a flat 20% to give your TP arts even more damage and the ability to regain even more HP from Soul Voices, and Aura Assault, which is the best skill if you are going for a melee weapon build and increases both your accuracy and attack power whilst an aura is active, and is another independent modifier, meaning this bonus is multiplicative and means you don't need any other form of accuracy boosting. Other skills you can then run are High Tension or Night Soul, both of which increase your maximum TP capacity by 1500. Supreme Sword, which increases your damage when initiating a melee combo, and Fast Forward, doing the same but reducing your cooldowns instead to make getting certain arts off again much faster. It's also worth progressing down this tree to obtain both Synchrony and Stellar Entry also, both of which are the only passive skills that affect skills in the game and are part of making your build even more effective. Lastly, that leaves us to discuss our gear for this build, and as always, we want Appendage Crusher, so go do Satie's quest to obtain the eye patch and then go finish Elmer's first affinity mission, We Were Soldiers, to get a uniform. If you want to know how this effect works, go watch literally any of my other masterclass guides. I've explained this enough times already and this video is long enough as is. The reason you want to run both of these, however, is due to the attribute resistances that you will gain, as the combination of both will keep you positive on every attribute, then paired with Astral Protection's effects will reduce all attributes damage by at least 55%. Aside from this, you may want to consider some sort of maximum HP up augments, as this stat dictates how much TP you receive from Essence Exchange, and you want to ordinarily have more than your maximum TP stat. Arts Gain TP is also useful as it activates before your art, making it impossible to accidentally kill yourself with Essence Exchange, so if you get this on a weapon as a trait, make good use of it. And other than this, you can just equip Potential up to deal even more damage. An easy source to obtain can be found in this chest within Primordia. This brings us to the demonstration section for this video, and for the final time, I'll be showing you how to get and keep overdrive going with this class. What's unique here, however, is that we don't actually need to start with enough TP when going into battle, as Essence Exchange will completely take care of this for us. Upon entering overdrive, the first most important thing that we need to do is get our aura up and running, so immediately activate Astral Protection and even use your quick recast to trigger the secondary cooldown effect to gain the level 6 version. From here, you should immediately use your green art, as going from a blue into a green art will restore 10% of your maximum HP on top of your aura's inherent healing. This will be a core principle of Galactic Knight, and it's important that you get familiar with all of the color combination effects which are displayed in the top right corner of the screen. With this in mind, we want to make use of the double overdrive count bonus gained from going from a green art into a yellow, orange or purple one. So use your stellar ray or high hit count art to begin building the counter and adding some hits. If you're running a mix of yellow and orange arts like me, make sure to use a purple art in between them, as you will be penalized for going between these colors and not gain any hits on the overdrive counter. Around the time Essence Exchange is about to come off cooldown, the overdrive timer should also be nearing its end. So use Essence Exchange once again, reactivate overdrive, and then repeat the art order as stated from before, to heal once again with your aura and make sure it is still active, as that is our lifeline. Once the counter has been raised to a sufficient amount and we're not in immediate danger of overdrive coming to an end, begin scrolling through your attack arts to begin bringing the damage and making use of the melee combo bonus damage that our skill applies. This is why Phenomenon is specifically located here on the right, rather than Conductive Rise, as this still counts towards this effect by using your melee weapon. Feel free to make a liberal use of the increased appendage damage multiplier by going from a purple art into either an orange or yellow one, and keep in mind that multi-hit arts with more hits are more effective at breaking appendages, so use either Starfall Rondo or Stellar Ray. Speaking of which, Stellar Ray should also be activated on occasion to maintain the beam resistance down debuff on the enemy, increasing your overall damage when using Galactic Cataclysm and any other arts that utilize this attribute. If you're using a slightly different build, however, focusing down Conduction Rise and Shooting Star for example, then most of what I have discussed here is still relevant, but just make sure to maintain the shock effect as much as possible and keep Conduction Rise on the enemy. This strategy actually might be better dedicated towards the end game, when you can have a Javelin user easily apply shock onto an enemy and spread the effects to everyone via Bahamut Wave, as well as ranking it up to level 6, a feat that is not normally possible or feasible, but with a combination of all of these builds has a good chance of absolutely annihilating the enemy in front of you. And with that, you've made it through your masterclass guide for Galactic Knight, bringing us to the end of this series. I hope you found this guide useful and that you've enjoyed it. Apologies for this one being a bit longer than the others, but there were a ton of mechanics and things I felt needed to be discussed when bringing up this class. As always, I'd once again appreciate it if you'd consider clicking that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future guides that I plan on bringing you all very soon. There seems to have been an influx of people wanting videos talking about skills, so I will get round to them as soon as I can. I thank you all for watching though, and I'll catch you in the next one. This is JB, signing off.